Austal's very pleased to be here this evening to sponsor this event, and I thank ASPI for the opportunity to do so. The company's certainly come a long way since the first fishing boat was built in WA in 1988. No one then would have envisaged that an Australian company would be building littoral combat ships and joint high-speed vessels less than 20 years later. The company listed on the ASX in 1998 and has now got more than $2 billion worth of work on the books, both here and overseas. And as we shift our emphasis from the commercial to the national security sector, and we turn our attention to our role as Australia's global prime defence contractor, we're pretty excited about it. But Austal's not only about shipbuilding. We've got an office here in Canberra. We've got a systems group developing and maintaining a number of products for the Australian and international market. We also provide in-service support and integrated logistics support. And to that end, we've got service centres and regional offices here and overseas in strategic locations in Asia, Middle East, Europe and the Caribbean as we look to the future. It's a truly global company that's proudly Australian and proudly hails from WA. And that's a great segue into introducing our guest speaker this evening. Defence Minister Stephen Smith needs little introduction to this audience. Born in Narrogin in Western Australia, he studied law at UWA and the University of London. After a political background, he entered Parliament as a member for Perth in 1993 and has served as the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade, and in 2010 was appointed to his current role as the Minister for Defence. Minister, welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say this evening, and I now ask you to address the audience. Thank you.
Well, thanks, David. Thanks very much. I'm very pleased to see that you've transferred from a great Australian Navy to a great Western Australian company. That's all I can say about Austal, if only because the CEO of the DMO is here as well. Can I acknowledge the Chief of Navy, Ray Griggs. Can also acknowledge again Warren King, the CEO of the DMO, Michael Carmody, the Chief Executive Officer of Customs and Border Protection and the Secretary of the Department of Defence, Duncan Lewis, and can I formally acknowledge the Chair of ASPI, Stephen Loosley, my former parliamentary colleague, and the Executive Director of ASPI, Peter Jennings. And on the way in I saw my distinguished predecessor, one of my distinguished predecessors, Robert Hill, so can I acknowledge Robert as well. ASPI, of course, plays a very important role in informing public debate and encouraging discussion on important national and international strategic and security affairs, and so I'm very pleased to have received an invitation to speak to you this evening. I've actually prepared a paper, given the academic and forensic way in which ASPI applies itself to these matters. The paper will be put up on the website and made available to you. If I were to read all of the paper, you'd be asking Peter and Stephen to organise breakfast as well as dinner. What I propose to do is to essentially make a contribution which sees the changing strategic environment as we move from the 2009 white paper to the 2013 white paper, and to deal variously with the basis of the 2009 white paper, what has occurred since then, the shift of economic and strategic and military influence to our part of the world and the continuation of that, the United States rebalance, the drawdown which is in prospect for the ADF from Afghanistan and from East Timor and the Solomon Islands, and the implications for that for our force posture, our own force posture review, effected and released recently by the Prime Minister and I, but effected by Alan Hawke and Rick Smith, and then, of course, global financial crisis and the implications that has for budget and financial matters so far as defence is concerned. You should take my paper as read. I'm not proposing to traverse the issues that I traverse in the paper on global financial crisis and budget and financial matters, nor indeed the Australian Force Posture Review, but to focus on the, if you like, the transition from a 2009 white paper to a 2013 white paper, focusing on that economic and strategic shift to our part of the world, the role of the US and its rebalance, and the drawdown of ADF operations from those three areas I've referred to. National security and economic security are the two highest priorities of any Commonwealth government. Protecting and defending our national security interests involves making complex judgments about short-term and long-term risks and opportunities in relation to international strategic environment. This includes judgment about defence posture and operations, defence capability and defence funding. This periodically requires Australia to methodically review the international strategic environment and our own strategic settings and posture to ensure they are appropriate to Australia's changing strategic circumstances. That phrase, Australia's changing strategic circumstances, is the title of my paper delivered tonight. The gap in defence white papers between 2001 and 2009 was far too long a period to enable such consideration. And that is why the government committed in 2009 to defence white papers not more than 5 years apart, and why the Prime Minister and I announced in May that the government would deliver a new defence white paper in the first half of 2013. The 2013 white paper will address the range of significant international and domestic developments since 2009, which influenced Australia's national security and defence settings, including their impact on force posture, future force structure, budget and finances. The May 2009 white paper underlined that Australia's most basic strategic interest remained the defence of Australia against direct armed attack. This includes not just armed attacks by other states, but, regrettably in the modern world, by non-state actors. The 2009 Defence White Paper also had as a strategic priority the security, stability and cohesion of our immediate neighbourhood, which we share with Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, East Timor, New Zealand and the South Pacific Island states. Beyond our immediate neighbourhood, the 2009 White Paper found that Australia has an enduring strategic interest in the stability of the wider Asia-Pacific region, from North Asia to the Indian Ocean. These three enduring strategic interests, in my view, remain. Our most basic strategic interest must continue to be the defence of Australia against direct armed attack. Australia as well has a deep stake in the maintenance of an Asia-Pacific security environment, including in our immediate neighbourhood, which is both conducive to stability and the peaceful resolution of problems between countries, and which can absorb the rise in strategic influence and military power of emerging major players. As part of this, Australia has a deep stake in the security of Southeast Asia, which covers our northern approaches, through which, of course, hostile forces would have to operate in order to sustainably project force against Australia. Beyond Southeast Asia and the Asia-Pacific region, Australia has a strategic interest in preserving an international order that restrains aggression by states against each other and which can effectively manage modern risks and threats, including from the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, fragile and failed states, and intrastate conflict. The 2009 White Paper underlined that Australia's national security and defence policy had to be founded on the principle of self-reliance in the direct defence of Australia and its strategic interests. This also envisages the maintenance of regional and international defence relationships which enhance our national security and which provide us with interoperability required to work with others when we need to pool our resources as part of a regional or international community response. The 2009 White Paper identified the following tasks for the Australian Defence Force, the ADF. The principal task for the ADF is to deter and defeat armed attacks on Australia by conducting independent military operations without relying on the combat or combat support forces of other countries. The second priority task for the ADF is to contribute to stability and security in the South Pacific and East Timor. This involves conducting military operations with others as required, including in relation to protecting Australian nationals, providing disaster relief and humanitarian assistance, and, on occasion, stabilisation intervention. The next most important priority task for the ADF is to contribute to military contingencies in the Asia-Pacific region. including in relation to assisting our Southeast Asian partners to meet external challenges and to meet our alliance obligations to the United States. Finally, the 2009 White Paper stated that the ADF has to be prepared where our national interest aligns and where we have the capacity to do so, to contribute to military contingencies in the rest of the world in support of efforts by the international community to uphold global security and a rules-based international order. These tasks, in my view, remain current, and I expect them to be reflected in the 2013 White Paper. As a result of these priorities, the 2009 White Paper envisaged a future ADF which would be more capable in certain areas, particularly undersea warfare, anti-submarine warfare, surface maritime warfare, air superiority, strategic strike, special forces, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, and cyber security. As a consequence, the 2009 Defence White Paper outlined an ambitious program of capability enhancements for the ADF, which included a number of core capabilities. In total, there were some 180 capability projects in the 2009 Defence Capability Plan associated with the 2009 White Paper. The vast majority of those remain in the DCP today, with about 10 projects removed, largely as a result of being overtaken by other projects. Since the 2009 White Paper, Government has approved over 100 first pass, second pass and other approvals with a total value of around $13.5 billion. This includes a record 49 approvals of capability projects in 2011. The previous record, I'm told, was 36 in 2006. And we continue to progress the core capabilities that I've referred to. The Government is committed to delivering these core capabilities and to delivering one of the most capable defence forces in our region, with the people and equipment needed for the task. The Government also remains committed to the enhanced strategic planning process outlined in the 2009 White Paper, which involves a new White Paper at intervals no greater than 5 years. On a 5-year timetable, the next White Paper would be due in the first half of 2014. Because, however, of the significant developments internationally and domestically since 2009, the Government has brought forward this schedule to the first half of 2013. These changing strategic considerations, which influence Australia's defence posture, future force structure and defence budget and finances, include the ongoing strategic shift to our region, the Indo-Pacific and the Asia-Pacific, particularly the shift of economic weight to our region, the ADF's operational drawdown from Afghanistan, East Timor and the Solomon Islands, the United States' rebalance to the Asia-Pacific and Australia's enhanced practical cooperation with the US pursuant to our alliance relationship, Australia's own force posture review, the first in a quarter of a century, the last, of course, by Professor Dibb, who's here this evening. Bearing in mind the 2009 White Paper judgment that the global financial crisis was the most fundamental economic challenge facing Australia, the ongoing adverse impacts and effects of this crisis have continued to have a significant deleterious impact on the global economy. The strategic change outlined in the 2009 White Paper has continued. In recent years, changes in Australia's strategic circumstances and the global security and economic environment have been significant. Australia's current and future strategic interests are overwhelmingly positioned to the north, the northwest, the northeast and the Indian Ocean Rim. The 2009 Defence White Paper will address these changing strategic circumstances and interests, including the shift towards the Asia-Pacific as a region of global strategic significance, the rise of the Indian Ocean Rim as a region of global strategic significance, the growth of military power projection capabilities of countries in the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean, and the ongoing presence and role of the United States. In this century, the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean Rim, what some now refer to as the Indo-Pacific, will become the world's strategic centre of gravity. The rise of China is a defining element in this, but it is far from the only or the whole story. The rise of India is still underappreciated, as is the rise of the ASEAN economies combined. The major and enduring economic strengths of Japan and the Republic of Korea also need to be acknowledged. So must the great individual potential of Indonesia as it emerges from a regional to a global influence and a country so important to Australia. As well, the US rebalance to the Asia-Pacific will see greater United States military, economic and political engagement in our region. The critical importance, strategically, of the Indian Ocean continues to be substantially underappreciated. The countries of the Indian Ocean Rim are home to more than 2.6 billion people, almost 40% of the world's population. The security of its waters goes to the heart of global, regional and Australian strategic interests. The proportion of world energy supplies passing through critical transport choke points, including the Straits of Malacca, the Straits of Hormuz and the Suez Canal, will only increase in coming years. The Indian Ocean already ranks amongst the busiest routes for global trade. It will become a crucial global trading thoroughfare in the future. Crucial trading routes, the presence of large and growing naval capabilities, as well as transnational security issues such as piracy, will drive Australia to ultimately put the Indian Ocean alongside the Pacific Ocean at the heart of our maritime, strategic and defence planning. The ongoing shift towards our region is not, however, just about economics or demographics. Military and strategic influence is also moving to our part of the world. Economic growth has underpinned military modernisation and military capability growth across our region. The Indo-Pacific will be home to three of the world's superpowers, the United States, China and India, and is home to four of the world's largest militaries, the United States, Russia, China and North Korea. The Indo-Pacific is also home to the world's largest navies, including the navies of the United States, China, India and Russia. The implications of this historic shift continue to unfold. No one can say with precision or certainty what the new international or regional order will look like. The regional international community response to these challenges will be critical and will in many ways help determine the outcome. These changes of strategic circumstance, the changes in economic, political and military weight, do require adjustments to the United States, China, India and Australia, and our region are adjusting to that. How we manage that adjustment to ensure continued stability and prosperity is the most important objective we have and the central challenge that Australia has in the coming decades. The level of economic integration between Australia and China sets an important benchmark for our political, strategic and defence-to-defence and military-to-military engagement. The challenge is to raise the level of political and strategic engagement to the same level as our economic engagement. The same is true of the United States-China relationship, and even more importantly so. The bilateral relationship between the United States and China is and will be the most important bilateral relationship we will see in the course of the first half of this century. In the fullness of time, the bilateral relationships between the United States and India and between China and India will, in my view, grow to the same level of importance. We've already seen deep economic integration between the United States and China. The United States and China now need to grow their political and strategic relationship to the same level. Australia now encourages enhanced defence-to-defence and military-to-military engagement between the United States and China. That's why we've welcomed the progress made by United States Secretary of Defence Panetta and Chinese Minister for National Defence Liang at their recent meeting in Washington, the first for 9 years, or the first visit for 9 years of a Chinese Defence Minister to Washington, and why we welcome the pending reciprocal visit by Secretary Panetta to Beijing. Some assume that the economic and strategic influence of the United States, the world's largest economy and superpower, will be rapidly eclipsed overnight as a result of this new distribution of strategic influence in the Indo-Pacific. That's not Australia's view. By the second half of this century, the Indo-Pacific will be home to 3 superpowers, and the strategic environment will be defined, as I have said, not just by the relationship between Washington and Beijing, but also by the relationships between Washington and New Delhi and Beijing. The United States, China and India will be the great strategic powers of our region and of the international community. The emergence of 3 great strategic powers in the region will see an adjustment in the balance of power across the region and around the globe. In Australia's view, the United States has underwritten stability in the Asia-Pacific for the past half-century and will continue to be the single most important strategic actor in our region for the foreseeable future, both in its own right and through its network of alliances and security relationships, including with Australia. A continued, indeed enhanced, United States presence in the Asia-Pacific is essential to peace and stability in our region. Australia welcomes the United States' ongoing and enhanced engagement, its rebalance to our region. Amidst these strategic shifts, some have posited, indeed some have even suggested directly to the United States itself, that a substantial decline in or withdrawal from our region would be appropriate. I don't see it in this way. The United States is not going away and is rebalancing towards the Indo-Pacific, as President Obama underlined in his speech to the House of Representatives in November last year. President Obama, Secretary of State Clinton and Secretary for Defence Panetta have all reinforced that the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean Rim are of vital importance to the United States. We're seeing a shift in focus by the United States to our region, from United States Central Command focus on the Middle East to the United States Pacific Command, characterised when I was recently in Hawaii as having responsibility from Hollywood to Bollywood, from the west coast of the United States to India and the subcontinent. Substantially enhanced practical cooperation between Australia and the US is an essential part of Australia's contribution to regional peace and stability. In November last year, the Prime Minister and President Obama announced during the President's visit new force posture initiatives that significantly enhanced practical defence cooperation between Australia and the US. Coming on the 60th anniversary of the ANZUS alliance, these initiatives strengthen an already robust partnership that has been an influence for stability and peace in our region. It represents an evolution of existing exercises and activity that the US already conducts with the ADF in Australia. Australia and the United States, in addition to the marine rotation, have also agreed to closer rotation between the Royal Australian Air Force and the United States Air Force that will result in increased access of United States aircraft through Northern Australia. This will also enhance bilateral collaboration and offer greater opportunities for combined training and exercises. The details of such enhanced aerial access is yet to be the subject of detailed discussions between the Australian Government and the United States administration. Down the track, it is also proposed to examine the possibility of increased US naval access to Australia's Indian Ocean port, HMAS Stirling, from my own state, Western Australia. For Australia, this presence will support our long-held strategic interests in maintaining and expanding United States engagement in our region. US force posture initiatives are an extension of our existing defence cooperation and defence arrangements. Australia already hosts military exercises involving large numbers of United States personnel. The United States does not have military bases in Australia, and this will not change. The activities take place through access to Australian facilities. These initiatives will also provide tangible benefits by increasing the number, variety and complexity of training opportunities for the ADF. This will further develop our interoperability with United States forces and help the ADF develop its ship-to-shore capability, which will be important when the landing helicopter docks come online. And this is one of the practical advantages of seeing a MAGTF rotation through Darwin. Our respective military forces must be postured to respond in a timely and effective way to the range of contingencies that may arise in our region, in particular humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. We expect that this deepening practical cooperation with the United States will also reinforce existing relationships and provide opportunities to enhance cooperation with our partners in the region. Australia is exploring these possibilities with both the United States and our regional partners. For example, Australia, Indonesia and the United States are planning to hold a trilateral Australia, US, Indonesia humanitarian assistance and disaster relief desktop exercise this year and a full-scale exercise next year under the general auspices of the East Asia Summit Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Framework. Indonesian President SBY Yudhoyono has said on a number of occasions that he sees the prospect of China observing such exercises, and in the longer term he sees the potential for Australia, the United States and China doing exercises themselves in a trilateral way. This suggestion Australia has welcomed. My paper then refers to the ADF drawdown from Afghanistan, East Timor and the Solomon Islands, the ADF Force Posture Review, which I initiated last year and has been released by the Prime Minister and I in recent weeks, and the implications which continue, the implications of the global financial crisis and the implications that continues to have for defence budgets and defence expenditure. I won't detail those, as I say, you should take those as read. I expect the 2013 White Paper will draw together all of the factors I have referred to ensure that Defence and the ADF are positioned with the right force posture and force structure required for the defence of Australia and the security of our region. I've asked Alan Hawke, Rick Smith and Paul Rizzo to form a ministerial advisory group to assist in the development of the 2013 White Paper. As you would know, Dr Hawke and Mr Smith are both former secretaries of the Department of Defence, and Mr Rizzo is the independent chair of the Defence Audit and Risk Committee and has led the development of the plan to address problems in the repair and management of the amphibious and support ship fleet. Their work and Defence's work will build on work already completed or underway since 2009, including the Defence Planning Guidance, the Force Posture Review and the Force Structure Review, which is underway. Planning for the security of Australia and its national interest is a fundamental responsibility of an Australian government. An essential part of fulfilling this responsibility is making strategic, risk-based decisions about Australia's long-term national security and defence needs. This means we must understand the implications for Australia of changing strategic, security and economic circumstances. It means we must analyse and understand the impact of these changes on Australia's defence force posture, our future force structure and our defence budget. The 2013 Defence White Paper will therefore address Australia's changing strategic circumstances, the shift towards the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean Rim as a region of global strategic significance, the increased focus of the United States on our region through its Global Force Posture Review, Australia's operational drawdown in Afghanistan, East Timor and the Solomon Islands, Australia's own Force Posture Review and the ongoing effects of the global financial crisis. In these matters, as in all matters related to our national security and defence arrangements, the government would welcome and receive ASPI's advice. Thank you very much for attending this evening. Thank you for the invitation and I look forward to responding to your questions. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Minister has agreed to take a number of questions, which is the only thing that remains between us and the main course. But let me start with the person in the very back of the room. Yes, please.
Minister Anna Henderson from ABC News. You spoke during your address about down the track the possibility of increasing US naval access through HMAS Sterling. This afternoon there have been reports about a US Defence Department Commission report on the possibility of basing American nuclear aircraft carrier in Perth. Is this a serious possibility, considering Colin Barnett, the Premier, seems to have already ruled it out?
Well, as you know, the arrangements that we entered into with the United States administration and announced when President Obama was in Australia in November last year, have three priority areas. Firstly, the rotation of a Marine Task Force group through Darwin. That started with an initial contribution of 250 and over a period of time will grow to 2,500, and that's gone very well. It's gone very well not just as an exercise in itself, reflecting cooperation between the United States and Australia, but also because we've already seen expressions of interest from the region, not just from Indonesia, which I referred to, but to tease out the possibility of enhanced cooperation with partners in the region, particularly in the area of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. The second area that was agreed was the potential for enhanced aerial access to our air bases in Northern Australia. And as I've said in the past and indicated in my paper tonight, we have focused to date on the arrangements with the rotation of Marines through Darwin. We've not yet had a detailed discussion about the enhanced aviation or aerial access to our northern bases. But that is the next cab off the rank. The third cab off the rank, and I've said in the past I regard this as further down the track, if only because, as I indicated in my paper, it will take some time before we see the growth of India and the growth of the strategic importance of the Indian Ocean Rim. But as sure as night follows day, that will occur. What you have referred to, I think, is the release today of the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, the CSIS report, which is commissioned by the Department of Defence on a, from memory, an annual basis. It's being released overnight. It's accompanied by a letter from the Secretary of State for Defence, Leon Panetta, and a comment from him. He makes it clear, as I do, that the report is an independent report to the United States government. It's not a United States government document. And Leon Panetta's covering letter and comment makes it clear that whilst there is much in the report which is consistent with current United States policy, particularly so far as rebalancing is concerned, that the suggestions contained in it are from an independent report. They're not United States policy. So far as the possibility of enhanced access to HMAS Sterling is concerned, as I've said previously, that is very much the third cab off the rank. We have not had a conversation with the United States administration about that or any of that detail. I do make this point very clear. We don't have United States military bases in Australia, and we are not proposing to. What we have talked about in terms of either increased aerial access or naval access is precisely that, greater access to our facilities. I haven't read the full CSIS report. I've read parts of it. Some of that create the impression that the independent think tank is talking in terms of home porting or a US base. That is not the basis on which we would proceed. What we are looking at down the track is the possibility of further or enhanced naval access to HMAS Sterling. The strategic rationale for that is the growing importance of India and the growing importance of the Indian Ocean Rim, particularly in a naval and maritime sense.
Ex-Minister Neil James was waving vigorously at me.
Minister, I know what you said, and I hesitate to sound like a Green senator at Senate estimates, but the CSIS report on page 8 and 9 is actually quite interesting. Everyone's fixating on the strange idea that the Americans would base a carrier task force in Perth, but on it's the discussion of the Marine Air Ground Task Force that's of more interest, I would think, to many Australians, where the report seems to assume, and I quote from the report, moving select US Marine Corps units from Okinawa and evolving into 4 Marine Ground Task Forces to be located in Okinawa, Guam, Hawaii and Australia. So in other words, at least some parts of the American hierarchy are thinking not just of rotations, but also of a more permanent nature of the move. And it's interesting to note that they comment on the following page, these variables include the involvement of more governments and levels of government decision making, e.g. Australia, Guam and Hawaii. So perhaps in America, some of them are thinking that the Australian government is a similar level of authority as the local governments in Guam and Hawaii.
Well, I think the more important part so far as government-to-government connection, relationship and contact is concerned, the more important part of the report is not what the independent think tank says, but what the United States Secretary of State for Defence says in his covering letter and in his comment. On my quick read of that this afternoon, that falls into the category of one of those suggestions which the Secretary of State for Defence is at pains to make clear is not something which is adopted as US policy. The entire basis of the agreement between the Australian government and the United States administration announced in the course of the President's visit in November last year was predicated on the following approach, that there are not United States military bases in Australia, and there is no proposal to, and the government would not countenance such bases. Secondly, we have joint facilities, the most important and obvious of which is Pine Gap. Thirdly, we have had for a long period of time United States access to our facilities, whether those facilities are Army, Navy or Air Force. And what we have agreed with the United States administration is a logical extension of access which has been provided over a long period of time. There's no suggestion been made to us that Australia should receive such a large number of Marines transferred from Okinawa or from Guam. We are proceeding on the basis of the agreement between the Australian government and the United States administration of a 6-month rotation out of Darwin. It's actually very difficult to have a lengthier period of rotation in Darwin given the wet season and the dry season. Not much gets done in the wet season, as you would know. And in terms of that rotation, we are in a stage way proceeding over the next 5 or 6 years to increase the number from 250 to 2,500. As a general proposition, I see a lot of suggestions made everywhere, either from commentators or from journalists or from think tanks here or elsewhere. I often see those views ascribed to the views of the Australian government, the United States government, the Australian Defence Force organisation or the United States Defence Force. Invariably that's not the case. They are views of commentators, journalists, think tanks or academics.
Thank you. I'll take one question from table 4.
Thank you, Minister. It's Grant Priesel from the Australian Industry Defence Network. Thank you for your presentation. My question, you mentioned earlier on, you talked about state actors and non-state actors. I'd like to hear your opinion on the development of defences in cyber warfare, and obviously if we had defences in cyber warfare, the vital role that Australian industry would play in any cyber warfare defences.
Well, I think in my prepared remarks I refer to the 2009 white paper referring to cyber security or cyber warfare as a priority, firstly. Secondly, that's a view shared by me and shared by the Australian government. And you might recall that when General Hurley became Chief of the Defence Force, he put that out there as one of the areas that he thought was of increasing priority and in need of increasing attention. I think that the two significant touchstones so far as I'm concerned about our work on cyber security has been firstly the OSMIN meeting that we held with Secretary of State Clinton and Secretary of State for Defence Gates in Melbourne in 2009, where we agreed that Australia and the United States would work closely together on cyber security matters. That was followed pretty quickly by a meeting of OCMIN, the 2+2 arrangement between Australia and the United Kingdom, where we agreed the same thing. And that, I think, did a couple of things. Firstly, it focused our mind on not just the need to have this as a priority of our own, but to make sure that it was a priority in terms of the work that we did with allies, with our ally, but also with other partners. I think there are a couple, 3 points I'd make. Firstly, as you correctly identify, cybersecurity is not just an issue for nation states, it's an issue for industry, it's an issue for government, it's an issue for individuals. And we've been at pains to urge industry and business to be taking necessary precautions themselves. And the dangers here come not just from nation states but from non-state actors. Secondly, we need to ensure, given you're dealing with cybersecurity, that it's not something where Australia is seeking to act alone but acting in concert with its friends and partners. And thirdly, in addition to taking individual action and also bilateral and multilateral action, we need to start now establishing some of the rules of the road. What we don't have are international norms which are accepted by nation states as being appropriate conduct or inappropriate conduct. And that's one of the issues that we have put out there as being of significant importance. Agreeing at some stage international norms will of course be of significance to state actors but would be ignored by non-state actors. There is a very close collaboration on these matters between the Australian Defence Organisation and other security agencies and the Australian defence industry with expertise in this area. That also occurs in comparable nation states, including the United States and the United Kingdom, so that collaboration with expertise in industry is of deep significance, and that will, in my view, only grow because this danger will not abate, it will but enhance and increase, and we need to take necessary steps to protect and defend the confidentiality of information which is relevant to national security. But business and industry and Australian commerce also needs to take steps to protect and defend their information which is relevant to their own and the nation's economic security.
Minister, thank you. Now, I'm conscious that more people do want to ask questions, but I think at this point I should be mindful of keeping us pretty much to time. So all I'm going to do at this point is to ask David Thomas from Austal to come forward to move a motion of thanks for the Minister. Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. We very much enjoyed it on Australia's challenges as we go forward to the 2013 White Paper. Thank you very much indeed for answering the questions in such a frank way, and also certainly questions with answers, which was great. And also thanks very much for the time you took out of your busy schedule to make it possible tonight. Very much appreciated.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.